Ever get that feeling? Like, when you're in a situation that's so tense, so weird, it almost feels surreal.
Yeah, totally.
That's kind of how I felt reading about all these diplomatic back and forths going on in the Black Sea right now. It's like everyone's in the same room, but they're trying so hard not to make eye contact.
Perfect analogy. Like a super awkward family reunion, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're dealing with. Ukraine, Russia, the U.S., all huddled in Riyadh for these separate talks. But the whole thing just screams awkward, especially considering the sensitive issues at stake.
No kidding.
So for this deep dive, we're not just going to rehash the headlines. We're going to try and dig a little deeper, figure out the why behind some of these surprising outcomes,
Right.
especially that reported agreement about no more military strikes in the Black Sea. And then there's the whole push to revive the grain deal.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It's all a bit cryptic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our aim here is to cut through the fog and give you a clearer picture of what these developments actually mean.
Exactly. Because, let's be honest, the news reports are pretty vague. Lots of cautious wording, not a lot of concrete details.
Right.
We're going to try and distill it down to what actually matters. What are the real sticking points? What are the potential implications for everyone watching this situation unfold?
Okay, so let's jump right into these Riyadh talks.
Let's do it.
The one that really stood out to me was that marathon meeting between the U.S. and Russia, 12 hours.
12 hours. Wow.
You have to wonder what they were really talking about all that time, especially with so little information being released officially, no joint statement, barely any specifics. Makes you think, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Ah.
And that statement from the Kremlin, super carefully worded. The outcomes are being reported back to capitals and analyzed. No immediate plans for high-level follow-up, but things could change quickly. I mean, come on.
I know.
They're playing their cards close to the chest. Makes you wonder what they're not saying.
Yeah. But we did get some hints about the agenda, particularly from Russia. Foreign Minister Lavrov specifically mentioned the Black Sea as a major point of discussion, even hinted at a potential maritime ceasefire to get trade flowing again. What do you make of that?
It's interesting how Russia's framing this. Lavrov basically saying the U.S. needs to order Kiev to sign a new navigation deal.
Yeah.
That says a lot about how they see the power dynamics here.
Yeah.
And then you have Putin openly questioning whether Ukraine can be trusted to uphold any agreements. Talks about a Nazi regime in Kiev.
Wow.
It's like they're deliberately trying to undermine any potential for trust.
Yeah, really painting Ukraine as unreliable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, do they actually believe the U.S. has that level of control over Ukraine, or is this more about posturing for the public?
Good point. But speaking of the Black Sea, there's this reported agreement between Russia and Ukraine to stop all military strikes in the area.
Right, big news.
Although, it's worth noting, we only know about it because the U.S. briefed Ukraine afterwards.
That is strange.
No joint announcement or anything. Why do you think they chose to communicate it so indirectly?
Makes you think, doesn't it? It could be a few things, I guess. Maybe the agreement's still really fragile, so neither side wants to fully commit publicly.
Okay.
Or maybe gives them some wiggle room, a bit of deniability if things go south. But let's zoom out a bit. Why does this matter for our listeners? Well, the Black Sea is absolutely vital for Ukraine's economy.
Right, their main export route.
Exactly. Especially for agricultural products. So any kind of disruption there has a huge impact on global food prices and availability. Even a temporary agreement to stop fighting could make a real difference.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the Black Sea grain deal, which seems to be a top priority for Russia right now. Just a quick recap for everyone. This was the deal brokered by the UN and Turkey after the war began.
Right.
Allowed Ukraine to ship grain from its key ports, even though Russia had initially blocked them. And in exchange, Russia was supposed to get some relief from the sanctions on its own food and fertilizer exports.
Exactly. That original deal was a big deal. It really helped to prevent the global food crisis from spiraling even further out of control.
For sure.
But then, of course, Russia refused to renew it last July, said the West hadn't kept its end of the bargain and that their exports were still facing too many restrictions.
Yeah, that was a big blow.
And now their position is basically this. They want the U.S. to force Ukraine to sign a brand new navigation agreement.
Wow, that's a pretty bold demand.
It really highlights how much they view the U.S. as the key player here, the one who calls the shots.
Yeah, but is that even realistic? I mean, Putin himself seems pretty skeptical. He's out there asking who will guarantee that the Nazi regime in Kyiv won't break their word. I mean, that's not exactly a vote of confidence.
Not at all. But here's the other interesting thing. Russia has also mentioned concerns about damage to energy infrastructure in the Black Sea. And they keep saying they want a more acceptable version of the grain initiative.
Right.
It's like they want the deal, but
Yeah.
only on their terms.
Yeah, they're not budging an inch.
It's a power play, for sure. Makes you wonder, what exactly do they consider more acceptable, and what are they willing to give up to get it?
That's the million-dollar question. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about Ukraine for a second.
Hmm.
They weren't actually present for that marathon U.S.-Russia meeting, but they were briefed on it by the U.S. afterwards, and it seems they've agreed to two major things: halting military strikes in the Black Sea.
Right.
And this is the surprising one. They agreed to the U.S. supporting Russian agricultural exports.
Interesting.
What do you think Ukraine's strategy is here?
It's a tough call. Ukraine relies heavily on the Black Sea for their own exports. So less military activity there is definitely in their best interest.
Yeah.
As for the U.S. supporting Russian agricultural exports, that could be a necessary concession to get Russia on board with a new grain deal.
Okay, a strategic move.
Exactly. Or maybe they see it as a way to test Russia's commitment.
Yeah.
But they're not giving Russia a blank check. They've made it clear that any Russian warship venturing beyond the eastern part of the Black Sea will be seen as a violation. They're drawing a line in the sand.
For sure. And their official statements are all about the need for real peace and guaranteed security.
Right.
Not just for Ukraine, but for global stability as a whole.
It's a big ask.
It is. And they keep saying these Black Sea agreements are just baby steps. Which begs the question, what are the next steps? What could a broader peace actually look like?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, it's hard to say. I mean, these developments offer a glimmer of hope, sure. But the overall geopolitical situation is still extremely tense.
Yeah.
Russia's still talking about negotiations, but it seems like they want to dictate the terms. And Ukraine's understandably focused on getting those rock-solid security guarantees, which no one seems willing to give them.
It's a stalemate.
It is. And it really highlights how fundamentally different their goals are. They're still miles apart on the core issues driving this conflict.
Yeah, and it's not like the rest of Europe is just sitting on the sidelines. Our sources mention this serious case of furrow developing. The UK and France are apparently planning to ramp up military aid to Ukraine through this coalition of the willing.
Right. So on the one hand, you have these delicate diplomatic dances happening in the Black Sea.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have a very real escalation of military support elsewhere. How do you think these two tracks of engagement influence each other?
It's a tough one. I mean, the increased military aid is obviously meant to help Ukraine defend itself.
Yeah.
But it could also make the diplomatic efforts in the Black Sea more complicated.
Yeah.
Because it signals that both sides are still committed to fighting, at least to some extent.
True. And it's easy to forget, amidst all these high-level talks, there's still a brutal war going on.
Yeah.
Just look at those recent drone attacks on Ukraine, those casualties in Sumy, especially those children. It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And then you have Ukraine hitting those Russian helicopters in Belgorod. Neither side is backing down.
It really does feel like both sides are digging in, doesn't it?
It does. And that's the worry, isn't it?
Yeah.
We might see some progress on specific issues, like trade in the Black Sea.
Right.
But the fundamental willingness to compromise on the things that started this whole conflict,
Yeah.
it's just not there.
Yeah, I hear you. So for our listeners, the key takeaways here are this. There's a fragile agreement in place to stop military strikes in the Black Sea.
Right.
Which hopefully will have a positive impact on trade.
Yeah.
And there's a renewed effort to revive that crucial grain deal.
Big developments,
Yeah.
for sure. But it's important to keep things in perspective.
Totally.
Yes, we might see some trade resume and less military action in the Black Sea.
Yeah.
But the wider conflict is still raging on.
It is.
The deep mistrust between the parties, their completely different goals,
Mm.
all those things are still huge obstacles to a lasting peace.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final thought for you all to chew on. Given that the fighting is still going on and that Russia and Ukraine have such different ideas about what a negotiated settlement would even look like, how significant are these initial steps in the Black Sea? Are they actually steps towards a broader, sustainable peace?
Good question.
What do you think is needed to move beyond these limited agreements and towards a real resolution? It's a messy situation, and the way forward is anything but clear.
You said it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
We'll be back soon to unpack more news and delve into the complexities of this ever-changing world.
See you then.